Ja, Warehkit pohkaidi. Mun on Elle-Maija Tailfeathers. Mun on Kanawas tai Blood Reservahtas ja Saamis. Ja mun agun ollut kihtu tiin pohkaidi. Ja kihtu Ramapolunahpe olumutimai. Hello, my name's Elle-Maija Tailfeathers. You can just call me Maija. I come from Kainai, or the Blood Reserve in Alberta. And I'm also Sami from Norway, and I want to offer my thanks to the Ramapo Lunapi people for hosting us tonight on their traditional ancestral territory. So I'm not an environmentalist, and that's because I'm a proud Blackfoot and Sami woman who is fighting an Indigenous struggle which is inherently tied to struggles for the land. And that struggle for the land is gendered too. I live in a country where the state thinks that me and every other one of my Indigenous sisters is better off dead. And that's why I'm not an environmentalist. So I'm going to tell you a story that I've told many times before. It's not a very unique story. It's actually a story I've heard many times before, too. And that's because if you just change a few of the details, it's the same story that so many other Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island and across this world can tell themselves. And if there's anything I've learned about stories, is that they can teach us something. But it's not until you find yourself under the said circumstances of that story and trying to figure out what the hell to do when you're in those said circumstances, that you actually understand the meaning behind that story. So I'm going to tell you this story I've told many times before, and then I'm going to get to the part about what I learned from this story, about maybe the things I did wrong, the things I could have done better, the things our community could have done better. Because fracking is happening on the Blood Reserve right now, and it's going to happen for the next couple years at least. So I've lived in the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people, otherwise known as Vancouver, British Columbia, for 10 years now. I went to the University of British Columbia. I studied First Nation Studies, and I did a minor in Women's and Gender Studies. And I considered myself a politically and socially conscious individual. You know, I read Taiga Alfred and Andrea Smith and Bell Hooks and Frantz Fanon. But the truth is, I didn't know the first thing about being on a front-line struggle for the land. I didn't know jack shit about that at all. And you never really know until you find yourself in the middle of that story. So what I'm sharing with you tonight is any sort of teaching I can offer to anybody that's at the beginning of that story. Because it's happening right now everywhere. So as I said, I come from the Blood Reserve. It's the largest reserve in Canada. It spans over 800 square kilometers. We have over 11,000 plus members of our tribe, half of which live off reserve. And it's the kind of place that brings you inward. The sky is endless. It's the kind of place that makes you think. It's the kind of place that makes you feel. And it's the kind of place that makes you grateful to be alive. And in the fall of in the fall of 2010, I have a deep love for this place, and this story is hard to tell. In the fall of 2010, our chief and council signed a major gas and oil deal, signing over more than half of our land to gas and oil companies for something called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. And they did so without consulting any of the 11,000 plus members of our tribe. This is what we do it for, right? Thank you. And at the time, I was in my last year of university at UBC, and I didn't know what fracking was. I was like, what the hell is this thing called fracking, you know? It was at a time when everyone was still learning. And so I found out about this deal that our chief and council signed through reading a little tiny Calgary business magazine article online that someone had shared on social media. So I started investigating, and when I did my research and I found out what fracking was, I went into this utter state of panic. I was like, what the hell? Like, they want to pump what into the earth, into our homeland? Who in their right mind would willingly do that? Well, our own chief and council. And that's the same chief and council that went on to make Stephen Harper an honorary member of our tribe. So I think that's enough said. So anyway, as I mentioned, over 50% of our tribal members live off reserve, and of those that live on reserve, the unemployment rate is over 50%. And the first thing that Chief and Council did once news of this deal broke was they handed out distribution checks to every member of the tribe. These distribution checks were handed out 10 days before Christmas for $800, and I don't know too many people who would turn down $800 10 days before Christmas, especially if you're broke, if you're a single mom living on social assistance. I should also mention that this deal also entailed a $50 million signing bonus. Again, our people had no say in what happened with that money. We don't know where it went. So what happened after this was that those of us who started to research what this whole fracking thing was, we started to reach out to each other through social media. We found each other on Facebook. Indians love Facebook. And we started to try and organize. It was a really small group. It consisted of about a handful of members of our nation, and then a handful of non-Blackfoot white people from surrounding communities, largely who were representatives of the Council of Canadians. And we did everything we could. We wrote letters to every level of government. We created petitions. We tried to hold community teach-ins. We tried to contact chief and council. We contacted the gas and oil companies. Everything was done to try and stop that first well from being built. And this all lasted for about 9 months. And as I mentioned, during this time I was in my last year of school at UBC, and so I did all I could to participate from Vancouver. I started a website that had a whole ton of information about fracking and this particular deal that our chief and council had signed. And then I also decided I would make a film. I'd never really made a film before, so I made this experimental film called Bloodland. And I took that first distribution check and I used it to fund the film. I paid a fully Indigenous cast and crew. I rented gear with that money, and I also fed my crew. And then I credited chief and council and the gas and oil companies for funding the film. Credit should always be paid where it's due. So I guess we could screen the film. It's just going to screen on silent behind me. Heads up, it's pretty gory, but I mean, if you're here listening to Indigenous women talk about struggles for the land, then you better be prepared to deal with this kind of stuff, because this is just child's play compared to the systemic violence that Indigenous people face every day of our lives. Just checking my time here. Okay, good. I still got like 5 minutes. So I don't know. Whoever's running the AV thing, do I just hit play here? Oh, okay. Where? Oh, here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so it's just gonna screen behind me while I talk. It's an experimental film. Yeah, you can watch it online later with sound. So now I'm going to take you to September 2011. We're actually almost 3 years to the day for when this happened. So I happened to be home visiting my family, and one morning my mom wakes me up and she says, "Lois and some people, you know, they're having a demonstration down at that first well site." And I was like, "Oh shit, I better go." So my brother and our friend and I went to the well site. And we showed up, and the protest actually consisted of 2 women, Lois Frank and Kathy Brewer, and they were holding up a couple signs that said "No fracking on blood land." And so we decided to stay, and we decided that we demand that the chief put a halt to fracking until our tribal members had been properly consulted and until we'd actually made the decision as a nation. And until then, we'd block access to the site. That also meant not letting the people on the site off. So throughout the day, maybe 16 others came and went. It was a peaceful demonstration. We even fed the security guard dinner. There were children and elders there. And anyway, when I got to the site, one of the first things that we did was Lois called Tom Goldtooth with the IEN. And she hands the phone to me, and then Tom says, "All right, you got to make some videos and you got to put them on YouTube." And this was before everybody had a smartphone or an iPhone, and I'd never uploaded anything to YouTube before. And so luckily my friend had just bought an iPhone, and we kind of awkwardly figured out how to do this. And we put some videos up of just what was happening down at the site. And before we knew it, the media kind of started to bite, and the police showed up, tribal police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The tribal police were actually in direct contact with Chief Charlie Weaselhead, and he said he just didn't have time to come down and talk to us. So we stayed until it got dark, and then we were given an ultimatum: either just give up your protest, or you can carry on your protest in the ditch in the dark, but stop this blockade thing, or get arrested. And that's when I heard Lois say, "Well, I'm not going anywhere." So I realized in that moment that I wasn't going anywhere either. I wasn't about to see this elder go to jail on her own. And that's also when Jill Crop-Eared Wolf decided she would stand with us. So we were arrested by tribal police and thrown in a tribal holding cell for 10 hours. The holding cell was this concrete room with a steel door and a steel toilet with a camera pointed at it, and there was no toilet paper, and there was another woman in there who'd been thrown in the drunk tank. So it was a really interesting night. And then they released us in the morning, and I was nowhere near prepared for sort of the media onslaught that happened after that. It was 2 weeks of constant media interviews. I had never spoken to the media before. I didn't know that you didn't even have to do interviews if you didn't want to. And I wasn't prepared for the amount of misrepresentation in the media. The court process lasted about 6 months. We were charged with intimidation under the Canadian Criminal Code, and the judge agreed to clear all charges if we took an alternative measures program. So I was given a probation officer, and I went to the probation officer, and she said, "I don't really know why you're here, because what you did was an act of community service." So she wrote a letter, and then... So she wrote a letter, and all the charges were cleared. It was over, just like that. The only thing was I wasn't allowed to step near a well site for a couple of years. And after that year, I fell into a really deep depression. I couldn't sleep at night. I had anxiety attacks thinking about what was happening to the land and water, knowing that there were well sites literally 2 kilometers from my grandparents' home. I got angry really fast, and I felt alienated from myself and my community. And that day basically left me questioning everything I knew. I mean, how is it that 3 unarmed women from our tribe were arrested by tribal police for protecting the land, the one thing that is most sacred to us? So 3 years later, almost to the day, as I mentioned, I finally understand why that that experience left me feeling so dark afterwards. And it's because what happened was an act of lateral violence, it was an act of gendered violence, and it was an act of systemic colonial violence. The chief and council agreeing to sign away over half of our land for this destructive, awful form of gas and oil extraction was an act of lateral violence. The male police officers arresting 3 women and throwing us into jail, that was an act of gendered violence. The gas and oil companies exploiting yet another marginalized Indigenous community, basically fueled by this predatory capitalist agenda, that was an act of violence. And all of this fits under this whole system of colonialism, which is inherently rooted in the utter disempowerment of a people. So it's no wonder the Canadian state doesn't give a damn about Indigenous peoples, and it's no wonder industry doesn't give a damn about Indigenous peoples, because it's always been about taking our lands and taking our resources and erasing us as a people, but we're still here. So I just have like 2 minutes, I think, not even, maybe. And so I'm going to get to that part about what I learned. So as I mentioned, that core group of people who were organizing and trying to fight fracking from happening on the Blood Reserve, half of those people were white folks from the Council of Canadians. And what I've learned is that those people are important. Allies are important. Don't turn away help when you need it most. And also, allies, if you want to do something about climate justice, reach out to local Indigenous communities who are on the front lines of these land struggles. And obviously, we're not all born organizers, we're not all born leaders, so be humble and recognize your weaknesses, and reach out to those veteran organizers, reach out to elders, and ask for guidance, ask for help, because you need it. I mean, these industry folks are really, really suave. They know what they're doing because they've been doing this for a long time. And be good to each other. Lateral violence is so prevalent in our communities, and unfortunately it's very prevalent in this movement as well. So you're not always going to like the people you're working with, but think about the bigger picture. Getting arrested, that should be your last and final resort. You should do everything else possible before you find yourself in a jail cell. I mean, there's enough of our people incarcerated right now, and your energy is put to better use outside of a prison cell. And if you are going to set up a blockade, Indians love blockades. If you're going to set up a blockade, make sure you know what you're doing. Have a course of action. Speak to someone who knows the law beforehand. Know what you stand to be charged with if you're getting arrested. And have boundaries set. And make sure that you maintain peace and respect throughout that entire demonstration. And be prepared to talk to the media. Know who you're talking to. Know that media source and know what they tend to report on and the kind of stuff that they tend to produce. And know your talking points. You only have a couple of minutes for these interviews. And know that you don't have to answer every single question, and you don't even have to talk to media sources you're not comfortable talking to. That being said, there's so many incredible alternative media sources right now, and we need to utilize those media sources for our benefit. So media can also be your friend. And again, like I said, we're not all organizers. And it's important to go to the rallies, it's important to go to the marches, but we need to continue to be more creative in our efforts. I know that I'm not really an organizer. That's not what I do. My strength is storytelling, and my strength is working with film and video, and that's where I'm investing my energy in this movement, in the struggle for Indigenous self-determination, in the struggle for our land and resources. I'm investing that energy there, and I want to, you know, challenge people in this movement to be more creative about what we're doing. It's about more than just going to the marches and the rallies and posting on Facebook and Twitter. It's about what you do on the streets, on the land. And I think that's it. That's all I have time for. Thank you.